Boom, welcome back. Huge one today. I got my friend Rico Ngoma of SourceFindAsia.com. Now, I was connected with Rico a couple years ago. His sourcing company is a game changer. And in this presentation, he's going to go over the 4 steps to find a Chinese supplier. Real quick, his company, it is huge. I recommend it to everyone. Basically, what they can do is they can take care of the sourcing side from A to Z. They can find samples for you. They can negotiate with the supplier for you. They can A to Z manage your whole project for you. They can do product photos. So that's huge. Having someone, he has a team on the ground in China. They can handle the negotiations, the getting your product made from A to Z. So I've used them multiple times over the years, and I recommend them. So you can check them out at sourcefindasia.com. He's based in Asia, team in China, like I said, from Toronto, Canada, repping the 6. Rico, are you there? What's up?
Hey man, what's up? Thanks for the intro.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So yeah, you're in Manila these days.
Yeah, these days I'm located in the Philippines. Let me just share my screen real quick.
Cool. Yeah. Let's see. Go ahead and share your screen, and then boom. 4 steps to finding a quality Chinese supplier. So yeah, guys, listen to the end. This is gonna be some huge knowledge, and he's got a PDF to at the end. So yeah, what do you got
Yeah,
for
so
us?
just a little bit of background.
Yeah.
As Riley mentioned, I'm based in BGC in the Philippines. Started the company. My business partner started the company a little bit over 12 years ago, and because he had a second business, he kind of shut it down. And then when we met, he wanted to restart the business and have me kind of run it and be the face of it. So that was a little bit over 5 years ago. And I lived in China for 5 years. I left pre-COVID, like literally a few weeks for the breakout. And I originally was supposed to come to the Philippines in April, but obviously with COVID, I decided to move early. But my business is set up now in a way, as I'm sure Riley talks about a lot of times on the YouTube channel, and I'm sure even in some of these presentations, my business is now set up in a way where I don't physically have to be in China. I've got a good team. We set up automated systems, so I'm not working in the company anymore. I'm working on the business, and I can do presentations like this. I also run a YouTube channel called Source Find Asia and a podcast called the Made in China Podcast. And me and Lorenzo go way back. He's actually a big part of the reason why I moved to China in the first place. I found a forum that Lorenzo had posted. He posted something about 2 dudes in the US running a YouTube channel called The Elevator Life. Now it's Enter China.
Yep.
And that was like a big part of the reason why I decided to move to China. So I have to give a shout out to Lorenzo for that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Your business partner, that's China Mike, right?
It's China Mike, yeah.
Yeah, I know him. He's a very legit guy, yeah. So you guys are in good hands.
Nice.
So we've over the last 5 years, we've exported products all over the world, roughly $20 million in mass productions. We worked with small entrepreneurs, startups, and we've also worked with really large corporations like Cirque du Soleil. So our experience runs through the full gamut, whether it's OEM products, which is I think a lot of what the guys. I mean, that's the whole program that you guys are doing, right? And then we work a lot with ODM as well, people that want to do Kickstarters and design their own products from scratch. So my presentation today in 4 steps to find a high quality supplier is a presentation I've done a few times. It's quite long, so I'm gonna give you an abbreviated version. And then you can also download the PDF on the website that goes a little bit more in depth. And it's essentially what we like to call the SAFE method. So just 4 simple steps taking you from searching for suppliers all the way down to how to roughly manage mass productions. The mass production part of it is also a little bit brief because that's a whole other story. But by the end of this presentation, you're going to be able to know how to assess a factory, how to get your contracts and things like that set up, and also a little bit on how to manage an actual mass production. So without further ado, I'll jump into it.
Awesome.
Uh,
Sounds
the, f-
great.
so the first step is super simple: search. It's really important. Um, I think that there's a few different ways that you can go about searching. If you're based in China, like I was, or you have a team in China where you can hire a company in China, you want them to be able to go offline, not just online. So physically going to factories and physically going to the markets to find goods. That's a good way of finding suppliers that are going to be difficult for your competitors to work with. And usually, a lot of times, if a factory is not listed online, they're a little bit less expensive. But then I think the main way that a lot of guys who are going to be watching this presentation are going to go online, and there's a couple different websites. There's Alibaba, that I'm sure you guys know about, Global Sources, and 1688. So the differences between the three, Alibaba is obviously the most famous one, but Alibaba is sort of like a spray and pray situation. Like they allow a lot of factories to be on there, and that's a big part of the reason why they're popular. But a lot of times, most of the suppliers that are listed on Alibaba are trading companies. And I'll
Mhm.
talk about how to kind of figure out the difference between a factory and a trading company shortly. But Global Sources is a little bit more niche. They take a lot of time to assess suppliers. They don't allow any factory or any trading company to be listed, and you're more likely to find higher quality suppliers on global sources, but you're just not going to have as many options. 1688 is probably one that a lot of people don't know about, but it's essentially the Chinese version of Alibaba. So all of the factories on there tend to not have English speaking sales staff. They tend to not have as much experience with exporting abroad. But at the same time, you can really take advantage of that because most people are not going to be able to find those factories. Most of your competitors are not going to be able to find those factories, and those factories are going to be less expensive. The negative side of it is that you have to walk them through the import-export process, which is something that we've actually done for Riley in some of his products, where we found suppliers that were listed on 1688, and then we set it up, and then we passed it on to them. So that being said, in terms of trying to figure out the difference between a real factory and a trading company, there's a couple of different ways. I think when you go to their websites on Alibaba, one of the things I always look out for is how many years of experience do they have, and then how is their website laid out. Like if they show a lot of pictures of the factory, if they show a lot of certifications, it's always a good sign. If everything makes sense, that's a good sign. And then if they have a bunch of different products, let's say they have cell phone covers, and then they also have shoes, and then they have random LED toys, then that's a major red flag that this is a trading company, because every single product, as simple as it might look, has to have a ton of machinery to create. So there's not that many factories that have the space or the capacity or the expertise to make 5 different products at the same time. So that's a big one in terms of figuring out if it's a trading company just by the initial assessment. And then when you start to communicate with them as well, there are also ways to figure out if you're dealing with a trading company, which leads me to the next section, which is assess. When it comes to assessing suppliers, what I like to do is, so when I go through that whole process of going through the factories on Alibaba or Global Sources or 1688, my team usually creates a short list, what we like to call an initial factory list. And there'll be an example of this in the PDF that you guys can download. And it's essentially just the basic information that we take off of Alibaba or Global Sources or 1688. And that's the name, factory location, other information like MOQ, and are they a trading company or factory? And then we start to communicate with them. So we send them an initial email, or sometimes with my team, they're talking to the suppliers, to QQ or Alibaba Trade Manager, which is managed by Alibaba. We're asking them the basic information to eliminate them. So we're making a bullet point. This is extremely important, because I think a big mistake that people make when they email a factory for the first time is they send what to them seems like an organized email, which would be like 2 paragraphs of questions,
Mhm.
and that's okay if you're communicating with somebody whose language whose language is English as a first language or even as a second language. But a lot of times with Chinese suppliers, English might be their third or fourth language. And so it's going to be confusing for them to have this blocked text. So what you want to have is you want to have bullet pointed questions. So you're doing a brief introduction of your company, 1 or 2 or 3 sentences. Hi, my name is such and such. I'm the purchasing manager of this company. We're exporting, goods to the US or to the UK. And here is my list of questions. Point A, are you a trading company or a factory? Point B, is your MOQ flexible? Point C,
Yep.
Whatever the most relevant questions that you want to ask that would just quickly eliminate suppliers. A lot of times when you ask a supplier point blank if they're a trading company or factory, they'll tell the truth. So that's really, really important with that initial email. And then once you start to get responses, I think that you should always get responses from suppliers, legitimate suppliers, within 1 or 2 days. It should never take 3, 4, 5 days for them to reply.
Mhm.
That's always a bad sign, especially when you're just sending that initial email. It's not going to be a lot of information, so they should be able to respond to you really quickly. I like to look at it from an OEM perspective. If I'm assessing a factory, I want to know if there's flexibility for them to do original stuff in the future. I want to know if there's flexibility for if we're able to build up the orders and the production to a certain capacity. Would they be interested in doing exclusivity agreements? Of course, that depends on what your plans are for your business, or that depends on whether you actually want to build out a multiple product line, and if you can get exclusivity in a specific country maybe to start with. Those are the kind of things that you want to assess at that stage. Any questions at this stage?
This is all gold. Yeah, those supplier tips are great. Taking notes.
Just a quick question. People still using QQ in China right now? I thought that's a way gone by now.
No, they still use it. It's just not as popular, but it's
Okay.
still used,
Okay, cool.
especially for file sharing, because QQ it's just faster, and there's no limit on the files that you send. So a lot of people use QQ in the same way that you can use Google Drive.
Question in regards to differences between Alibaba and 1668. Did you notice a big difference in terms of pricing in terms, or is it pretty much same?
Alibaba
Same
and
product.
1688.
Yeah.
1688 is less expensive for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
You would say what, 20%, 30%, roughly speaking?
Well, it varies for sure, but yeah, I'd say on average 20%, and it can go anywhere up to 40%. Because I mean, what you're paying for when you're going through Alibaba is you're paying for a factory that's typically bigger, a factory that has export experience. The 1688 guys, they are selling locally, so they might have the same quality product, but they can't sell it for the same price in China as they can sell it for abroad.
So you guys have dealt before with factories from 1668?
Yeah, a lot. Like, actually, one of the suppliers that we hooked up Riley with was off of 1688, because Riley gave us a target price. So when we went on Alibaba, we realized that it just wasn't going to happen. So we had to find the supplier from 1688. And there's nothing wrong. Again, there's nothing wrong with suppliers from 1688. It's just that you have to kind of educate them more about the import-export process. And what I mean by that is just making sure that, if your product has some sort of safety requirements to be sold on Amazon, a good example would be PPE products, which is what people have been dealing with a lot in the last couple of months. Is if you needed to have an FDA certification or a specific CE certification, the factories on 1688 might not know what that is. So you would have to be the person to tell them, I need this certification, and it's going to this country, and these are the import documents that I need for Amazon. Like things like that you usually don't have to communicate as much with factories with export experience.
So for someone that might be listening right now to this podcast and looking to experiment with 1688, so obviously the first thing they need to do is don't just send them an email in English, but have it translated in Chinese.
Yeah.
And then if they need any help, then in that case, this is when a company like yours come in handy, so you can walk them through the steps when it comes to all the paperwork and requirements for Amazon and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend a first time sourcer to work off of 1688 unless they have additional help for sure. And unless they can speak in Mandarin.
I would say people listening just hire Source Find Asia and they'll handle it for you. I've done it a couple times and their prices are reasonable. So I'll just be honest.
And then the last part, I think, when it comes to assessing before we move into the next stage would be making sure that they have the right payment terms and price points. But when I say payment terms, a lot of times, if you're working with a factory off of 1688, like I said, even if you can manage to communicate all your requirements, they might need you to pay in local currency. So those are the kind of things you have to ask early. Otherwise, you're going to develop this whole relationship with the factory, and then at the end, you're not going to be able to pay them.
So speaking of that,
with another company,
I'd like your feedback on something, Rico, because I live in China for 4 years, and I talk to people on that, and I keep on getting like different answers. When you first contact a supplier, do you ask them for quotations in USD or in RMB? Which is better? What's your take on that?
I like to ask for them in RMB, and then but then the second question after that would be, do you accept USD payments?
Okay.
So like the first time we email them or we contact them, we might ask for the RMB quote, and then as we get deeper into assessing them, we will ask if they accept USD payments. But a lot of times with us, I want to know what their USD pricing is just so I can see how they're charging differently.
Sure.
But a lot of times with us, it doesn't matter, because if we have to pay in RMB, we can do that. It's never really my preference to pay in RMB, but if it's necessary for us or necessary for our clients, we can facilitate that.
And generally speaking, what do factories prefer, to be paid in RMB or USD?
I think it depends on the supplier. The ones that are on 1688 are definitely like 90% of the time are going to want to receive RMB payments, simply because they just don't have a USD bank account.
Sure.
Like this is a little bit of a tangent, but the way it works is if you're a trading company or a factory in mainland China, when your business gets set up, you get set up with a local business account. That's a RMB account. To get a USD account, you have to apply for a license. You have to apply for an import-export license and then get the bank account. And a lot of times that process of applying for the import-export license is very tedious, and there's a lot of taxes involved. So a lot of times trading like myself, like we don't have a USD account in mainland China. We have our Hong Kong trading company that can receive any currency. And then we have our business RMB account in mainland. I don't see any point of us getting a USD account in mainland China just because the taxation on it is ridiculous. So that's a lot of times what the case is.
And speaking of that, from what I heard and what I saw, a lot of those Chinese factories and businesses that deal with overseas, they have a Hong Kong office that so they can handle payments in foreign currencies.
Can receive exactly. So a lot of times we're paying the suppliers into their Hong Kong business account as well from our Hong Kong business account, which works out perfectly. I think the next part of the assess period is if you can't physically be in China, I think you want to be looking at samples, obviously. We usually recommend that clients order around 3 to 5 samples. If you can, go up to 10, but I would say 5 is a good sweet spot. And it can obviously become pricey. So one of the things that we do is we offer a service where we will receive a bunch of samples and consolidate those, and then maybe take out the bad ones before we ship them to our clients. So there's if you're working with a company, you can do things like that. But if not, I would say you want to see if you can try to consolidate your samples through maybe shipping them to a freight forwarder first, who can put the samples together and then ship them to you in one go. Because then you're going to save money on the express shipments.
And when you
instead of
said
paying 30 to 40 bucks a pop.
when you said 5 to 10 samples, are you talking from the same supplier, or from different suppliers, or both?
From different suppliers. But I mean, I guess it depends on the product. But like if you wanted to look at a product that has, let's say, different colors or different materials, then you probably want to order a couple samples per factory. But if the product is the exact same product, I would say 5 samples from 5 different suppliers. And then that should give you a good way to assess the quality of the suppliers. And this is after, obviously, you've had conversations about pricing and you've asked all the relevant questions that I mentioned before. And for me, the biggest thing when it comes to that is, after we've received samples and we communicate with clients, I think it's important to physically go to the factories and do a physical inspection at the suppliers. The reason is because you just never know 100% what you're dealing with until you show up there. There's been times when we communicated with what we thought were reputable factories, and then we showed up at their location and it was clearly not owned by them. Like they'd put up some signs and they basically created a factory overnight. And for me, with my experience and my team's experience, it's pretty easy to tell those kind of things. So I think it's really important that the last step of assessing a factory is physically going there. And if you have the five samples and you like 3 of them, then I think you should go to all 3 factories. Maybe go to the best one first, and then try to still go to at least 2 of them, because what you want is you want to have a backup option, right? So if you start working with one and you know that clearly this is the supplier for us, you just want to have that backup option in your pocket in case anything happens, in case something like COVID happens and your main factory becomes too busy to do a mass production order. You want to be able to pivot and find another supplier.
So you guys handle that type of stuff too?
For sure. I think, with that's something that we do with our initial research. Is we always try to recommend 3 to 5 suppliers. And then obviously we do factory inspections as well as mass production management.
So Rico, you guys, your office is located in Guangzhou, right?
Yes.
So are all your staffs located in Guangzhou? You have staffs also in other parts of the country. For example, let's say you have a factory in Zhejiang, another one in Beijing, another one in Hebei, whatever. Do you send your staff from Guangzhou? You have local people in those areas?
My main team is in southern China, but we work with professional inspection companies. So if we have to do a factory inspection that's too far away for somebody from my team to travel to, then we have reputable businesses that we worked with for years.
Okay.
That we hire out and send to the suppliers. But a lot of times, especially when it's a bigger project, the client would still prefer for us to go there, even though it's going to be more expensive. So, we'll still travel. It just means getting on a plane. I mean, last year, I spent half of my year in northern China for one specific project. I had to be there every month in the factory. All right. So moving on to F, which is finalized. So now that you've gone through that whole assessment period, you should probably have, like I mentioned, 3 options, probably 2 that are going to be ones that you want to focus on. And ideally you've looked at samples, but you've also physically inspected those locations. And then now you want to set up your contracts. So typically with suppliers, with OEM, non-disclosure agreements are not necessary unless you're going to change some aspects to the product. But you will definitely want to have at least a basic sales agreement set up. So the sales agreement is essentially a document that says, I'm buying this product for X amount of money. It's going to take this long for the production to be completed. and the most important aspect of the sales agreement, and it's probably going to take the longest to negotiate with your suppliers, is the quality control. Like, what happens if this happens? So if you do an inspection on your goods, and there's the defect rate is higher than it should be, what are we doing? Are we replacing the goods? Are we getting a discount from the factory? Like, that's a very important question to answer. And to give people a general idea of how these inspections work, there's a standard called the AQL level standards, and there's AQL level 1, 2, and 3. Just to give you a brief overview, the most common one is AQL level 2, and it's a standard that's a global standard that works with a bunch of different factories, and it's essentially saying, there's a critical, major, and minor defects, and on an AQL level 2 inspection, critical defects would be 0%. Major defects would be roughly 3 to 4% allowed, and then major defects would be roughly 2 to 3% allowed, and then minor defects would be roughly 3 to 4% allowed. And what they do is, when you're doing a physical inspection of products, you're not going to inspect the entire production unless the production is so small or you want to pay for multiple days of inspections. So with an AQL level 2 inspection, let's say your production order is 5,000 units, they're actually going to take out, according to the chart, they're going to take out 200 or 300 units for the inspection. And then out of that 200 or 300 units, those percentages would be applied. So it's your responsibility to decide what a critical defect is, what a major defect is, and what a minor defect is. The general guidelines are critical defect makes the product unsellable. So that's why it's 0% allowed.
Question, Rico. Question, Rico. So, for example, you mentioned the AQL 3 levels. Does that vary and change depending on what level the inspection is? For example, let's say if it's a pre-inspection, during inspection, and post-inspection, does that change, or does it remain the same throughout?
No, it should be the same, because you're setting a standard, right? The differences between AQL level 1, 2, and 3 is the strictness of inspections. Mm-hmm. So the least strict inspection is AQL level 1, and then the most strict is AQL level 3. So AQL level 2 is just the average. Okay. That's why it's the most commonly used one. And so, as I was saying, so critical defects are typically the defects that make a product unsellable. That's why it's 0%. Major defects are defects that would be noticeable to the end consumer, but it doesn't make the product unsellable. It just might devalue the product in their eyes. And then minor defects are typically defects that only the buyer or the person who actually made the product would notice. So that's sort of the general guideline there when it comes to the sales agreements. And like I said, that takes the longest. That's the longest thing that takes to negotiate with suppliers besides price. Another major thing that people miss out is they should try to have their sales agreements translated into Chinese.
Sure.
And the reason is because if anything happens and you do decide to pursue legal action, factories are allowed to say the contract was in English. We didn't understand this specific point. That's an actual argument that's allowed in Chinese courts. So it's really important to have the contract translated into Chinese. We have templates that were created by lawyers. Mm-hmm. So really for us, it's just plug and play. Like, we just have to change the defects and sort of the pricing and the product name, product description.
Yeah.
But
all another reason, guys, to my friends listening, I would say, another reason to just outsource this with them so they can handle it, the quality control, the contracts, the negotiating these sales agreements and everything. As a business owner, if you have the money and you're not totally bootstrapped, it's totally worth it to outsource this type of stuff so you can worry about other things.
And what are your thoughts on, for example, getting a Chinese lawyer to draft all this documentation, all this contracts, versus, say, a foreign lawyer? Do you think the Chinese lawyer would be better off because it's, I don't know?
Yeah, I think the Chinese lawyer is going to be better off because they understand what their requirements are more. So what happened with us is, if you can do it like this, this might be, the most ideal way. We had a lawyer in Canada draft the original sales agreement, and then later on we had it translated and
Okay.
updated by a Chinese lawyer. But the Chinese lawyer could have done both. It's just at the time I wasn't thinking that way. I was like I was inexperienced in a sense.
Sure.
And then later on, when I realized that I needed to have the documentation in both languages, I contacted a Chinese lawyer.
Sure.
And and a little bit of advice when it comes to that, to make sure that the English side of your contract is good. If you're going to work with a Chinese lawyer, I'd recommend finding a lawyer in Hong Kong or Shenzhen,
Sure.
because those lawyers are used to dealing with foreigners, and generally the language barrier is going to be less of an issue. If you're searching for a Hong Kong lawyer, a Hong Kongese lawyer, or a lawyer that's from Shenzhen.
Have you come across any? For example, I heard some people saying that when you submit a contract, the Chinese will either remove or add clauses to the Chinese version of the contract without notifying you and all that. Have you encountered any such cases before?
No, I mean, I've definitely had factories remove a clause, but when they sent it back to us, we noticed that the clause was gone, or they mentioned it to us. We've never had a factory try to do that. And a big part of it is, when you are getting your contracts signed with the factories, it has to be stamped with it has to be stamped with the red seal that the factories usually have.
Yeah.
That makes it final. Like, I mean, if they made a second version of the contract, then it would be, there would be a dispute in terms of why, two contracts were signed with the same stamp. And another aspect is, yeah, you definitely want to have somebody who's seen those stamps evaluated, because the stamp itself is in Chinese. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to read, like, the stamp is supposed to say the company name. So it's really important to make sure that your contract is stamped. You can sign the contract as a foreign entity. You can sign the contract, but you need to have it stamped by the factory.
Yes.
And then some other important bits of information to have listed on on the contract is whose bank account you're sending to. So going back to my original thing in the assess phase of figuring out whether the factory can receive USD payments, a lot of times, if a factory doesn't have a USD bank account and they don't have a Hong Kong bank account, they'll give you somebody's personal bank account.
Oh, wow.
Which can become problematic if you do have to pursue that legally. The first question the courts are going to ask is, why are you paying for why are you paying for goods to somebody's personal bank account? So that's really, really, if you have a very close relationship with the factory and you trust them, then more power to you if that's easier. But I wouldn't recommend it for first time sellers, or the first time you're working with a supplier.
So how do you verify that the account they sent you is actually a business account and not just their friend's account? Is there ways for you to verify that?
It's pretty easy, because the name will. It's easy if you can read Chinese. The name will be either a company name or somebody's personal name, and then also the structure is a little bit different when it comes to a personal USD account versus like a business USD account. But if you can, I think you could. This is something that you could even do with Google Translate. Is if you see the name translated and see if it's the same name as that they gave you, that the factory gave you. And you can also request for their business license to verify that the name is the same. Like, in the way that works with the verification of the business license, to make sure that they didn't send you a fake business license, because that happens.
Oh, yeah.
You can actually scan the QR code on the business license, and it takes you to the local municipality's website. And that lists out all the information about the company, how long they've been running, who's the owner, the location, the name, all that stuff.
Okay.
All right. So at the end of the finalized period, you should be signing a contract and having it stamped, and then you're going to go into mass production. So the reason why I called this section Elevate is I feel like a lot of times people, if they don't understand how to manage a mass production and they're doing it themselves, they think that the work is over once they've signed the contract and sent an initial deposit. And in my opinion, the work is just getting started, especially if it's your first time working with a factory.
Sure.
Some things that can happen if you're not paying attention is you do your whole mass production, and then at the end of the production, you're coming out with 60% defective rates on your goods, and then now you have to deal with trying to get the factory to replace all of that. A lot of times your productions can be pushed back. If the factory feels like it's not a big deal, they'll just push back your production, and you'll come back to them after 20 days and ask them, is my mass production ready? And they'll say, oh no, sorry, by the way, we had to push you back by 15 days. And you're like, okay, but why didn't you say something? No, it's like, why didn't you say something earlier? So you don't want to just sit back. You want to elevate your relationship.
Oh, wow.
And the way you do things like that is make sure you're communicating in the right channels. So if you're talking to a supplier and initially you're talking via email, you might want to shift from email to WeChat or QQ, because it's going to be much easier to communicate with your salesperson and get quick answers.
Sure.
If you're talking to them on WeChat.
Email
should be mainly used for things like documenting. So when you're sending out contracts and things like that, that's the time when you want to send an email. But in terms of just the day-to-day, and it doesn't take that much to send a message to the factory and say, hey, can I have an update on my production? Can you send me pictures? Things like that. And then at the same time, you're dealing with a human being. So you might want to develop a relationship with your salesperson. You might want to ask them about their personal life, share stories about yourself and sort of build that connection. I always make it a point when I meet salespeople for the first time, because family is very important in China, is to ask them if they're married, if they have kids, and then the next time I see them, I'm asking how are the kids. You know what I mean? I just try to maintain that relationship, and then over time
socialize a bit. Yeah.
Socialize a bit. Yeah. I think that's a big issue with the West, is we're so used to moving very quickly when it comes to business. But the way it works in Asia is that they want to build the relationship first before they build, the business partnership.
Sure.
So if they don't feel that connection with you, then it might become problematic in the future if you want them to do things for you that are, let's say, out of the scope of the original agreement. Another thing is understanding how your factory operates. This is extremely important, because you wonder why you're asking somebody to do something and they can't get it done. And a lot of times it's because you're talking to the wrong person. So a salesperson, for example, doesn't know much about, not always, but a lot of times a salesperson doesn't have a lot of technical knowledge.
Sure.
Right? So if you're asking the salesperson a million technical questions and they're not giving you full answers or straight answers, or they have to take 2 days to reply, that's because they probably had to go and either talk to their manager who's more experienced, or they had to go talk to the engineer. So that's another aspect to remember, is who are you talking to? And then sometimes with this decision making, the salesperson might not have the decision making power to, let's say, give you a discount because of defects. So maybe you want to have your salesperson that you talk to on a regular basis, but you also want to ask for the information of their manager, or at least to be introduced to their manager. Sure. When you're going through the finalize phase, right? So it's really important just to understand, how does your factory operate? Who are you talking to? Is that the right person? Is that the right person to ask this question to? And then just in general, understanding the workflow of the factory, what the chain of command is and how they do their productions. So this happened really early on in my business. Is we were doing an original design, and our client wanted to do a beta run, which we usually do when it's a first production, because you're making this product for the first time. So you want to make sure that you don't just jump into mass production. So the idea was, let's order 50 items first as the beta production run, and then we'll jump into the full mass production run. And luckily, when we went to the factory, we asked this question. We asked them, so how long is it going to take for the first 50 samples to be done off of the main production line? And they said, we're not going to use the main production line. And we were like, why? Because you ordered 50. And then we asked them, how much do we need to order to do the mass production on the actual mass production line? They said, we never open up our mass production line unless somebody orders over 50 units. So
I have a question on that, because we encountered this. We had a call with our students just before that, and one of our students was placing a small order for, say, 400 unit. And in cases like that, because as you said, they're not going to open a new production line for anything less than, say, 1,000 units, whatever the MOQ is. So in that case, I asked her to ask the factory, where are those units coming from? Are these from leftovers from previous orders? Or are they from they're getting it from other suppliers or that? How do you guys approach that? Do you also ask, for example, for smaller orders, where are those units coming? Are they coming from off the shelves, from previous runs, or if you get it from other suppliers? Do you also inquire as to where are the units from the smaller orders coming from?
Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation that you have very early. Is like, remember when I mentioned that you want to ask them if their MOQ is flexible. Sometimes a factory will open if they want the business. Maybe they're not so busy. Maybe they can add your goods to their other productions. If there's not that much customization involved with the goods, so you can have that conversation for sure. Trying to figure out where the goods are coming from and yeah, most of the time, if it's a reputable supplier, and a trading company is going to buy from another factory. If the original supplier that they were going to buy from says that the production's too small, they're just going to find another supplier to fulfill that order. But if it's an actual factory, they're either going to reject the order or they're going to tell you to wait. So they'll give you like a long production time. And then the reason why they're doing that is because they want to just basically build up a bunch of different orders and put it together.
Sure.
So yes, as I was saying, like, it was really important that we asked that question, because what would have happened with this particular production is that the engineers were going to make those 50 beta production samples, and that wouldn't have been good because the engineers' sample quality would have been much better, or at least not the same as mass production, which defeats the whole purpose of what we were trying to do. So in that situation, we just ended up ordering, 10 more, and then we did the beta production run on the actual production space. So it's just really important to understand those things, like how does the factory actually work? Otherwise, like I said, you're going to end up like asking yourself why the beta production run quality is different from the mass production quality. And then another thing is, when it comes to elevating, you want to help the factory find problems. So even if the factory says that they have their own QC in place, I don't think it's ever a good idea for you to just wait and have the factory do their own QC. So like, either doing things like what I mentioned, which is like a beta production run. If there's customization involved with your goods, I definitely think you should do some sort of beta production run, or at least a during production inspection on your first order. Like, I think it's extremely important. If you don't do that, you're just setting yourself up for failure. Totally. And then when it comes to the end of the production, doing your final inspection, again, if a factory says, we did an inspection and everything is great, send the money, I don't think you should do that. I think you should be sending an inspection company to do a final random inspection. Always, even if the production is a small production, saving $200-$300 over losing a whole production. I don't think that's a smart move. So it's really important to go through that process, and that's how you continue to elevate your relationship with the factory. So that's pretty much it, guys, in terms of the SAFe method. As I mentioned, the PDF goes a little bit more in depth. This was essentially a summary of the longer presentation, and there'll be some examples of some of the documents that I mentioned that will be listed in the PDF. And in terms of sales agreements, for you guys, I can also provide our English sales agreement template.
Nice. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for doing that. Lots of awesome tips right there. And everyone listening, you can check the links below for his website and everything that we're talking about. Um, yeah, all of this ins and out stuff. I just keep thinking of in the back of my head, like, yeah, so glad I decided to outsource all this stuff and hire a company like you guys. Because if you want to do it right, and especially if you're a beginner, you're not going to do it right yourself as a beginner. So that's what his company does, obviously by popular demand. So I recommend, if you're not totally bootstrapping, to outsource this to these guys. Just going to be honest, my experience is all positive with SourceFind Asia and Rico. He's friends of friends, so it all kind of came together, and it's been working out. It's been good. So highly recommended. Links below. And Rico, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
One more question, Rico. Sorry. So in the current climate, are you seeing that the Chinese factories are a bit more willing to, more receptive, more flexible with terms because they're hurting with business? Are you noticing any such behavior from them right now?
In terms of payment terms, I don't think much has changed, but maybe the sizes of the orders, or the factories are going for smaller orders, because if they didn't pivot to PPE products, then most of the factories, their usual business went down. So yeah, for sure, there's definitely more flexibility with order quantities right now. But I would say they're still going to request typical payment terms, which would be 30% up, 70% down. If it's a smaller order, they might request a higher deposit.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I got some more specific questions about stuff I got going on right now, but I'll ask you after the call. Again, check them out. Links below, guys. Thanks again, Rico. We will talk soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the FBA Lifestyle Podcast. Don't forget to follow on all podcast platforms, YouTube and Instagram. Ready to fast track your first or next FBA product? Ready to create a real product that leaves the competition in the dust? Then check out the 90-Day FBA Challenge, a 12-week accelerator program with weekly coaching calls where we help you go from zero idea what to sell to a product live on Amazon within 90 days. And download the free Amazon Secrets ebook, FBA Lifestyle, the Amazon Experts. Start your FBA business. Achieve the freedom lifestyle.